The world had gone silent. Only the snow spoke now, whispering secrets to the night as it fell gently over a man who should have been dead, somewhere in the remote mountains, far from the chaos of the city he once ruled. A black car sat abandoned on the side of a frozen road. Its doors hung open, one light still flickering weakly through the storm. And beneath that cold, pale glow lay him, the man they used to call the Wolf of New York. Blood stained the snow around him, spreading like a dark halo. His breath came in short, ragged bursts, each one weaker than the last. A gunshot wound to the chest, another through the shoulder. No witnesses, no mercy. His empire, his enemies, his sins, all of it had finally come for him. But fate has a strange sense of timing. Hours passed. The storm grew harsher, the temperature dropping below freezing. The world was ready to bury him. Yet somewhere, through the heavy white blur, a faint sound emerged. The creak of old boots against ice. The quiet rhythm of someone walking toward him. She didn't belong here. A girl, maybe 20, wrapped in an oversized coat, her breath fogging in the cold. She was carrying a lantern and a basket of firewood, heading home to the tiny cabin she shared with her grandmother. And then she saw him, a shadow half buried in the snow, a streak of red cutting through the white. At first she thought it was an animal. A wounded deer maybe, but when the wind shifted, and she saw the faint shape of a man's hand reaching out, everything inside her froze. She dropped the basket. The firewood scattered. The man was still breathing, barely. His eyes opened for a moment, dark, wild, and full of something that wasn't just pain. There was power there, even in his dying gaze, a presence that didn't fit the silence of the snow. She hesitated. She should have run. Anyone else would have. But something in that moment, maybe instinct, maybe fate, pulled her closer. She knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she pressed a piece of her scarf against his wound. The heat of his blood soaked through instantly, bright against the cold fabric. "Don't talk," she whispered. Though he hadn't said a word, somewhere deep in his chest, a low sound escaped, and not quite a groan, not quite a growl. The wolf was still alive, and in that single act, a stranger choosing to save a man the world wanted dead, everything began to change. The night stretched on. Snow kept falling, and in a tiny wooden cabin hidden between the trees, a story began, not of power or vengeance, but of something far more dangerous, because sometimes the heart doesn't know the difference between saving a life and surrendering to one. The cabin was small, barely more than a few wooden walls and a stubborn old stove, but inside, the air was heavy with warmth and the faint crackle of fire. Elena sat near the hearth, her hands trembling as she wrung out a blood-soaked cloth into a basin. The sound of the water dripping echoed through the silence like a heartbeat. The man she had dragged in from the snow now lay on her grandmother's old cot, a stranger with death clinging to his skin. His shirt had been cut away, revealing deep wounds across his chest and shoulder. The bandages she'd wrapped around him were already turning crimson. She'd done what she could, stitched the worst of it, stopped the bleeding. But even now, she didn't know if he'd live until morning. Elena looked at him again. His face was hard, sculpted yet haunted, sharp lines beneath the dim firelight, a jaw set like he'd clenched it through storms far worse than this one. His dark hair was still damp with melted snow. A faint scar ran from his temple down to his cheek, old, pale, and deep enough to speak of violence long before tonight. There was something unnatural about his stillness. Even unconscious, he looked powerful, dangerous. She had seen men hurt before, hunters, drifters, wanderers who lost their way in the mountains. But not like this. This man didn't look lost. He looked hunted. Elena turned to the window. The snow outside had stopped falling, but the wind hadn't quieted. It howled against the wooden walls, rattling the glass, as if the storm still had unfinished business with the world. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heartbeat pounding faster than she wanted to admit. Her grandmother would have told her to leave him. "Don't bring trouble home, child. Trouble has a way of staying longer than kindness." But her grandmother was gone now, and the house was too quiet, too empty for her to ignore the sound of another human's fading breath. So she had dragged him here, through the snow, one desperate step at a time. And now, hours later, that decision felt like a thread she couldn't unwind. When he suddenly coughed, a deep, harsh sound that tore through the silence. Elena froze. His hand twitched. Then his eyes opened. They were dark, too dark. And for a second, she thought she'd been pulled into the gaze of something primal. Something that saw more than she wanted it to. He tried to speak. His voice rough and broken. No words came out. His throat was too dry, his body too weak. Elena rushed to his side, lifting a spoon of warm water to his lips. "Easy," she whispered. "You're safe now." Safe. The word felt fragile, almost like a lie, because somewhere inside her, she knew a man who looked like this didn't just end up shot in the snow by accident. He swallowed, the faintest sound of breath leaving him. His eyes fluttered closed again, but his chest rose, slow, steady, alive. Elena exhaled in relief she didn't understand. Then she sat back, watching the firelight flicker over his face. Who was he? A soldier? A criminal? A man someone wanted dead? And why, even knowing that, did she feel like she'd done the right thing by saving him? Hours slipped away. The fire burned low. Elena wrapped herself in a blanket and sat near the bed, unable to look away from the stranger she'd brought into her world. Outside, the wind whispered his name, a name she didn't yet know. But miles away, in a city of lights and silence, people were already searching for him. Adrian Moretti, the man who ruled half the underworld with an iron hand and a quiet smile, had vanished. And when men like him disappear, the world starts to bleed. By morning, the storm had quieted, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt like the earth itself was holding its breath. The snow outside glittered under a pale blue sky, untouched except for the trail of footsteps Elena had left the night before. A single path leading from the forest to the cabin, and nowhere else. Inside, the air was heavy with wood smoke and the faint metallic scent of blood. Elena sat by the fire again, her hair tied messily at the back of her head, a half-empty mug of coffee cooling in her hands. Her eyes, tired but alert, kept drifting to the stranger lying motionless in the bed. His color had returned, faintly. The fever was still there, but his breathing had steadied. She had cleaned his wounds through the night, changed the bandages, and whispered to herself to stay calm each time his body shuddered in pain. He hadn't woken again, not fully, but there were moments when his fingers moved, when a muscle along his jaw twitched, as if his mind was still fighting through the darkness. She didn't know his name yet, didn't know the weight of it, or how it echoed like a warning in cities far from this cabin. But somewhere down the mountain, someone did. A black SUV was parked along a frozen stretch of road where the blood trail had begun. 3 men stood around it, heavy coats, black gloves, guns holstered under their jackets. Their breath came out in clouds, mingling with the smoke of cigarettes burning between calloused fingers. "He couldn't have gone far," one of them muttered. "He was bleeding out," the other smirked. "If he's not dead, he will be soon. Either the cold gets him, or the boss's bullet finally does." They didn't notice the footprints leading deeper into the forest. Or maybe they did, and simply underestimated what waited beyond the trees. Back in the cabin, Adrian's hand suddenly clenched around the edge of the blanket. His chest rose sharply, and for the first time since the night before, his eyes opened, fully this time. Elena startled, the mug slipping from her hands and shattering against the floor. He looked at her like a man trying to remember where he was. Or perhaps who he was. The confusion lasted only a moment before something else took over. A flash of instinct, of control. His voice, when it came, was rough but steady. "Where am I?" Elena hesitated. "You're in my home, in the mountains." He blinked slowly, scanning the room, the fire, the wooden beams, the faint scent of lavender soap in the air. His gaze returned to her, sharp and assessing. "You brought me here?" "Yes," she said quietly. "You were dying out there." He exhaled long and shaky. "You shouldn't have." The words hung between them, not cruel, not ungrateful, but heavy with something darker. She frowned. "You were shot. What was I supposed to do? Leave you in the snow?" His jaw tightened. "You should have." Then silence again. The crackle of the fire filled the space where neither of them knew what to say next. Elena stood, gathering the broken pieces of the mug, anything to distract herself from the unease crawling up her spine. "I stitched your wounds," she said finally. You lost a lot of blood, but you'll live. At least I think you will. Adrian turned his head slightly, watching her move. There was something strange in the way she spoke. Direct, unflinching. She wasn't scared of him. Not yet. He tried to sit up, but the pain hit fast, sharp enough to make him gasp. He fell back, one hand pressed to his side. Careful, Elena said, stepping closer. You need rest. I don't have time for rest. The way he said it, quiet but commanding, sent a shiver through her. This wasn't a lost traveler or some unlucky stranger. This was a man used to giving orders, even on the edge of death. She crossed her arms, meeting his gaze. Well, you'll have to make time. The nearest town is 3 hours away, and the roads are buried in snow. You're not going anywhere. Adrian didn't argue. He just stared at her. This girl who'd pulled him from death and now spoke to him as though she had no idea who she was defying. For a moment, something softened in his eyes. You risked your life for a man you don't know, he murmured. That's dangerous. I've been alone long enough, she replied, her voice steady. Danger doesn't scare me anymore. Adrian looked away toward the fire. Then you don't know what real danger is. Outside, the wind howled again, a reminder that danger was already closer than either of them realized. The next few days blurred together, a quiet rhythm of firelight, pain, and uneasy silence. Adrian slept most of the time, his body fighting to heal. When he was awake, his eyes tracked everything. The room, the door, even the way Elena moved through the cabin. He didn't ask questions, but she could feel the weight of thoughts he wasn't sharing. Elena tried to keep herself busy, fetching water from the stream, chopping wood, mending the old quilts. Anything to keep her mind from circling back to the same questions. Who was he? Who had done this to him? And why did he look at her like he was trying to remember something he'd lost long ago? Every now and then, she'd catch him staring out the window, the muscles in his jaw tight, like a man who'd seen ghosts. It was on the third morning when he finally spoke again. You live here alone? She nodded. Since my grandmother passed. It's quiet here. Peaceful. Peace. He repeated softly, almost to himself. You're lucky. Elena smiled faintly. Sometimes it feels more like punishment. He turned his head, studying her. There was a calmness in her tone that didn't match her eyes, those deep brown eyes that held grief like a secret. What happened to her? She got sick last winter, Elena said. There's no hospital for miles. By the time I got her to town, it was too late. Adrian was silent for a long moment. Then he said quietly, You stayed. I didn't have anywhere else to go. He nodded, not out of pity, but understanding. People like him, people who had seen too much, rarely questioned loneliness. When he shifted to sit up, she was already beside him, her hand at his back before he could protest. His skin was hot to the touch, the heat of fever mixed with strength returning beneath it. You shouldn't be moving yet, she murmured. He ignored her. I need to leave soon, Elena frowned. You can't even walk without bleeding through your stitches. You die out there. Better out there than here. Why? She asked, her voice sharp now. Who are you running from? Adrian's eyes lifted to hers. And for the first time, she saw the truth flicker through them. Not fear, not guilt, but something far more dangerous. I'm not running, he said quietly. I'm being hunted. The words sent a chill down her spine. She wanted to ask more, but his expression stopped her. That cold, distant look of a man who'd spent too long hiding behind silence. She didn't know his story, but whatever it was written in the scars that crossed his body like a map of old wars. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. The snow outside had begun to fall again, heavy and soft, wrapping the cabin in white. But beneath the wind, she thought she heard something else. Faint crunching sounds in the distance like footsteps. She went to the window and peered into the darkness. Nothing moved except the trees. Still, her heart wouldn't slow down. Inside, Adrian stirred. Even half asleep, his instincts were sharp. What is it? He asked, his voice low, rough with exhaustion. Nothing, she said quickly. Just the storm. He studied her for a moment, then lay back, but his hand slipped toward the nightstand, where she noticed the faint glint of metal. He'd kept the gun she'd found in his jacket. Even now, weak as he was, he wouldn't let it out of reach. It was only then that she understood the depth of whatever world he came from. a world where no one ever truly slept without a weapon close by. The hours passed slowly. At some point, she drifted into a restless half-sleep near the fire. Adrian woke before dawn. His body ached, but the fever had broken. Carefully, he pushed himself up, testing his strength. Pain pulsed through him, sharp, but manageable. He looked at Elena, curled in a chair, her hair falling across her face, one hand resting near the dying embers of the fire. He studied her longer than he meant to. There was something pure about the way she slept, something untouched by the dirt and deceit of the world he came from. She didn't know his name, and that was the only reason she wasn't afraid of him yet. He reached for his shirt, wincing as the movement reopened a stitch. A drop of blood fell to the floor. Elena stirred immediately. "You shouldn't be up," she murmured, voice thick with sleep. "I need to see what's outside," he said, already pulling on his coat. "Outside?" She frowned. "In this weather? Someone's been here," he said quietly. Elena froze. "How do you know?" He looked toward the door. "Because I can still smell their cigarettes." Elena stared at him, the firelight flickering across her worried face. "You can't be serious," she said quietly. "No one comes up here in the winter." Adrian moved to the window, his movements slow but purposeful. He pushed the curtain aside with the back of his hand and scanned the white forest outside. The sun was just starting to rise, a pale, washed-out glow across the snow. "Tracks," he muttered. "2 sets, men, heavy boots." Elena's stomach twisted. "Maybe hunters," he shook his head. "Hunters don't smoke imported cigarettes." She didn't know what to say. The world she knew, the one of quiet mornings, firewood, and snowfall, felt suddenly smaller, fragile, like glass underfoot. He turned back to her, his expression sharp, calculating. "You need to stay inside. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone." Her pulse jumped. "What about you?" "I'll deal with it." The way he said it, low, controlled, almost calm, terrified her more than any raised voice could have. He moved across the room, steady despite the weakness in his steps, and began to check the few things she owned. The axe by the door, the old hunting rifle mounted above the hearth. He handled it like muscle memory, as though he'd been born with weapons in his hands. Elena followed him, her breath uneven. "You can't fight anyone like this," she said. "You're still bleeding." Adrian glanced at her. "I've fought through worse." "That's not the point," she said, her voice trembling now. "You're in no condition to protect anyone." He stopped, not because she was wrong, but because the truth in her words cut deeper than the bullet wounds ever could. For the first time since he'd opened his eyes, Adrian looked uncertain. Not weak, not afraid, just momentarily stripped of the armor he always wore. "Elena," he said softly. "If they find me here, they'll kill me, and they won't leave witnesses." Her heart stopped. "Witnesses?" He held her gaze, his voice barely a whisper. "You shouldn't have saved me." The silence that followed was heavier than any storm. The fire cracked, a single log splitting in two. Elena looked at him, this man with death in his eyes, who spoke like he'd already buried his own soul, and felt something shift deep inside her. "I don't regret it," she said. He stared at her, surprised by how steady her voice was. "You think I'm afraid of dying," she continued. "I've already lost everything that made life easy to live. If this is where my choice leads, then fine. But I won't apologize for saving someone's life." For a moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the wind outside, and something unspoken stretching between them, fragile but alive. Then Adrian stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "Do you always talk to strangers like this?" She met his eyes without flinching. "Only the ones bleeding on my floor." Something like a smile flickered across his lips, faint, fleeting, but real. It was the first warmth she'd seen from him, and it startled her more than the danger. Then the sound came, faint, distant, but unmistakable. The low growl of an engine somewhere beyond the trees. Adrian's head snapped toward the window. "They found us," he whispered. Elena's breath caught. "What do we do?" He turned to her, voice calm and deliberate. "Get your coat. We can't stay here. But no time." He moved quickly, checking the gun again, slipping it into his coat despite the pain. Every motion was practiced, efficient. This was who he truly was. the man behind the calm voice and wounded body. The Wolf of New York, awake again. Elena's heart pounded as she grabbed her coat and boots. The cabin suddenly felt smaller, suffocating. As she looked around, the old photographs, her grandmother's rocking chair, the small table where she'd eaten every meal since childhood, she realized she might never see this place again. When she turned back, Adrian was at the door, holding it open just enough to see outside. The sound of the engine grew louder. A vehicle, black and heavy, crawling its way through the snow. "Elena," he said quietly, "listen to me." She looked up at him, trying to steady her breath. "If anything happens, you run. Don't look back." She shook her head. "I'm not leaving you." He stepped closer, his eyes burning in the pale light. "This isn't your fight." "Then maybe it's time someone made it mine." For a heartbeat, they just stood there, two strangers caught between death and something dangerously human. Then Adrian reached out, his fingers brushing hers. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't affection. It was a promise, silent, desperate, and unspoken. Outside, the snow stirred again. The sound of the engine stopped. Adrian exhaled, cold air escaping through his teeth. "They're here." The next breath they took could have been their last. The moment Adrian heard the engine stop, every muscle in his body went still. He had learned long ago that silence was never safety. It was only the breath before violence. Elena stood behind him, clutching her coat tightly around her shoulders. The air in the cabin felt heavier now, like it knew what was coming. The smell of smoke and pine mixed with fear. Adrian moved slowly, steadying himself on the wall as he reached for the gun. His injuries pulled at him with every step, but he didn't flinch. Pain, to him, was a language he already knew. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. Elena didn't argue. She could hear the crunch of boots outside, faint but closing in. There were at least two of them, maybe more. She couldn't see through the small window, only shadows moving between the trees. Adrian took a slow breath. He looked calm, but his eyes, sharp, dark, unblinking, told another story. The door shook once. Then again, a voice called from outside, low and rough. "Anyone home?" Elena's breath caught. Adrian didn't move. He raised the gun slightly, eyes fixed on the door. The man outside spoke again. "We're looking for someone. Got into an accident last night. Maybe you've seen him." No answer. Then, the soft click of a safety being released. Adrian whispered without looking back. "When I say run, you run. Straight out the back door. Don't stop." Elena's voice trembled. "Where will you go?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The next second, the door swung open with a violent crack. Two men stepped in, snow swirling behind them. Heavy coats, black gloves, the cold edge of intent in their movements. One saw Adrian first. "Son of a—" The gunshot that followed cut him off. The echo filled the cabin, sharp and final. The second man dove for cover behind the doorway. Wood splintered as another shot hit the wall. Elena stumbled backward, her hands over her ears, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Adrian turned to her, quick, controlled, his voice steady. "Go," she ran. The back door slammed open into the snow. Cold air hit her like a wave, but she didn't stop. Behind her, another shot rang out. Then silence. Elena kept running, the snow deep around her legs, her breath turning to smoke in the frozen air. The trees blurred together. Every sound, her heartbeat, her breath, the wind, felt louder than it should. When a hand caught her wrist, she almost screamed until she saw his face, Adrian. He was pale, blood staining the front of his coat, but his eyes were focused. "This way," he said, pulling her toward the trees. They moved fast, or as fast as his injuries allowed. Each step was a struggle, his breath ragged, but he never looked back. Elena didn't know how far they ran. Maybe minutes, maybe hours, until the cabin was gone, swallowed by the forest and snow. They stopped only when the silence returned, broken only by the sound of their breathing. Adrian leaned against a tree, his hand pressed against his side. "You're bleeding again," she said, reaching for him. "I've had worse." He managed a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We need to keep moving. They won't stop until they're sure I'm dead." Elena swallowed hard. "Who are they?" He looked at her for a long time, then said quietly, People who used to work for me. The words hung in the air like frost. She wanted to ask more, to understand what kind of man she'd brought into her home. But the look on his face stopped her. This wasn't the time. Is there anywhere we can go? She asked. There's an old service road about a mile north, Adrian said. If we can reach it before dark, we'll be harder to track. Elena nodded, even though her legs already ached from the cold. She wasn't built for running, but she kept pace beside him. Every so often, Adrian would glance at her, at the way she moved without complaint, at the determination in her eyes. She wasn't part of his world, and yet she wasn't afraid to walk through it. When the snow began to fall again, light and slow, Adrian stopped to catch his breath. He sank to one knee, pressing a hand to his wound. Elena crouched beside him, tearing a piece of fabric from her sleeve and pressing it against his side. You need to rest, he shook his head. Rest gets you killed. Her voice softened. So does pride. That made him look at her. Really look at her. The wind moved her hair across her face, and for a moment, something inside him went quiet. He didn't say it aloud, but he knew this girl had already done what no one else ever had. Made him care if he survived. And that realization was more dangerous than any bullet. The forest stretched endlessly before them. Silent, white, and cold enough to steal their breath. The sun was slipping lower behind the trees, casting long gray shadows that looked like bars across the snow. Adrian walked a few steps ahead, his steps slower now. The blood loss was catching up to him. Each breath came sharp and uneven, but he didn't stop. Elena followed close behind, her hands trembling inside her torn gloves. Every sound in the woods, every cracking branch or shifting wind, made her flinch. But she kept going. For reasons she didn't understand, she trusted him. Maybe because she'd seen him bleed. Maybe because even when danger came, he never looked away from her. They moved until the light faded almost completely. The forest began to thicken, the trees closer, the air colder. Then, through the falling snow, Elena spotted something. A small wooden shed half buried near the hill's base. Adrian, she whispered. He followed her gaze. His jaw tightened as he weighed the risk. It wasn't safe to stop, but if they stayed outside any longer, the cold would finish what the bullets had started. Let's go, he said finally. The door creaked as Elena pushed it open. Inside was a small, abandoned storage hut, empty except for a few crates and a rusted lantern. The air was still and bitterly cold, but at least it was shelter. Adrian leaned against the wall, breathing hard. He sank down slowly, grimacing as his hand came away from his side wet with blood. Elena shut the door and hurried to him. You need to lie down. I need to think, he said quietly. She knelt beside him anyway. The wound looked worse now, the fabric soaked through. She pulled her scarf from around her neck and pressed it against his side. He flinched but didn't stop her. You're wasting your scarf. It's already torn, she said softly. You're the one wasting blood. That almost made him smile. Almost. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the faint whistle of wind through the boards. Adrian leaned his head back against the wall, eyes half closed. He looked exhausted, older than before. For the first time, Elena saw not the strength in him, but the weight. The kind that comes from carrying too many ghosts. After a long moment, he said quietly, You should have left me there. She froze. What? You didn't know who I was. You should have walked away. I couldn't. He opened his eyes, watching her closely. Why not? Elena hesitated. Because you were dying. That's not always a reason to save someone. She looked at him for a long moment, her voice almost a whisper. It was enough for me. Adrian said nothing. He turned his gaze toward the small window, where snowflakes brushed against the glass. He wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that simple kindness could still exist, but in his world, everything came with a price. As the hours passed, the wind outside grew louder. The storm had fully arrived. The woods howled, the trees groaned under the weight of snow. The shed trembled softly, but it held. Elena sat across from him, wrapped in her coat, watching the dim flicker of the lantern. She thought he was asleep until she heard him speak again. Voice rough, low. They'll keep looking, he said. They always do. Who are they? She asked quietly. For a long time he didn't answer. Then, in a voice so low it was almost a confession, he said, "The men I built. The men I trusted." Elena frowned. "You mean—" He nodded once. "My name's Adrian Moretti." The name meant nothing to her. She didn't recognize it the way most people would have. Not with the weight of fear or power. He noticed. "You don't know me?" She shook her head. "Should I?" Adrian let out a soft breath that might have been a laugh. "That's a first." Then his voice turned colder, quieter. "In another life, people bowed when they said my name. Some prayed I'd never find them. Others paid me to make sure I did." Elena didn't move. She didn't look away. "You're a Mafia," he said simply. "Or at least I was. Until someone decided I'd outlived my purpose." The truth hung between them, sharp and heavy. Elena's heartbeat quickened. The man she'd pulled out of the snow, the man she'd risked her life to save, was someone people feared. Someone who had done things she couldn't even imagine. But the look in his eyes now wasn't the look of a monster. It was the look of a man who'd been left to die by the only family he had. After a long silence, she said quietly, "Then maybe this is your second chance." Adrian turned his head toward her, studying her face. "There's no such thing in my world, maybe not in yours," she said softly, "but in mine, there still is." Something in her tone, steady, almost defiant, made him stop. For years, his world had been made of shadows, betrayal, and cold survival. But sitting there, in the dim light of that broken-down shed, he felt something unfamiliar pressing through the darkness. It wasn't hope exactly. It was quieter, gentler, like the sound of someone whispering your name when you thought you'd been forgotten. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, for the first time in a long while, Adrian Moretti felt the smallest flicker of peace, but he knew it wouldn't last. By dawn, the storm had quieted, leaving the forest covered in a thick white silence. Elena woke first. Her breath fogged in the cold air as she glanced toward Adrian. He was still awake, sitting against the wall, his expression lost somewhere between exhaustion and thought. She sat up slowly. "Did you sleep at all?" Adrian didn't answer right away. His voice came low, rough. "Sleep isn't safe when you're being hunted." Elena frowned. "You think they'll still be looking for you?" He looked at her, eyes sharp, steady. "They don't stop. Not until they find a body." That answer chilled her more than the cold air. She moved closer, checking the wound on his side. The bleeding had slowed, but his skin was still pale. "You're not strong enough to keep running," she said quietly. "You need help." Adrian managed a faint smirk. "You planning to call an ambulance for a wanted man?" Elena looked away, frustrated. "You can't survive out here like this." He sighed and leaned his head back. "I've survived worse," maybe he had, but there was something in his voice that told her. This time, he wasn't sure he would. She stood and walked toward the window. Through the frost on the glass, she could barely see the edge of the tree line. The world outside looked calm, but she knew better. Calm was just the quiet before another storm. A moment later, Adrian's tone changed. "Elena," she turned. "There's something I need you to do." Her stomach tightened. "What is it?" "If they find this place, you run. Don't wait for me. Don't look back. I'm not leaving you." "Yes, you are." His voice was firmer now. "You don't understand the kind of men we're dealing with. If they catch you helping me, I said I'm not leaving you," she repeated, softer but steady. The silence between them stretched thin. Adrian stared at her, seeing not fear, but resolve. The same quiet strength that had kept her alive in a place where most people would have frozen or broken. He didn't argue again. He just nodded once, almost as if he respected her defiance. Then faintly, they both heard it. The crunch of snow somewhere outside. One step, then another. Elena's heart stopped. Adrian reached for his gun, but his hand trembled slightly from weakness. She moved closer, her breath shallow. The sound grew louder, more than one set of footsteps now, careful but steady. Adrian motioned toward the side wall. "There's a back exit, go." Elena shook her head, her pulse racing. "What about you?" He looked at her once, a long, wordless glance, then pushed himself to his feet. "I'll draw them off." Before she could protest, he limped to the door and pressed his back to the wall. The moment the latch shifted, he swung it open and fired one shot into the trees. Shouts followed. 2, maybe 3 voices. Return fire cracked through the air. Elena crouched low, her heart pounding. She saw Adrian stagger as a bullet grazed his arm, but he didn't stop. He fired again, moving behind the shed. His movements were sharp and controlled, a man trained for violence, surviving on instinct. Then one of the attackers came around the side of the building. Elena didn't think. She grabbed the rusted lantern from the floor and threw it with all her strength. The glass shattered against the man's shoulder, flames licking his coat. He screamed and fell into the snow, rolling to smother the fire. Adrian turned just in time to see it. A quick, stunned look, then a flicker of something like pride. "Elena, move," he shouted. She ran toward him, and together they disappeared into the trees again. For several minutes, all that existed was the sound of their breathing and the snow crunching underfoot. The forest blurred past them. Branches scratched their faces. Snow weighed heavy on their clothes, but neither stopped. Finally, when the gunfire had faded behind them, they collapsed near a frozen stream. Adrian leaned against a fallen tree, his breath ragged. Elena knelt beside him, shaking, her face flushed from cold and adrenaline. "You were right," she said, panting. "They didn't stop." Adrian gave a short, humorless laugh. "They never do." She pressed her hand against his wound again. "You can't keep fighting like this." "I've been fighting my whole life," he said quietly. "It's the only thing I know how to do." There was no anger in his tone, no self-pity. Just truth. Elena sat beside him, pulling her knees close. The world around them was so still, it felt like time had stopped. Finally, she whispered, "If they want you dead so badly." "Why?" Adrian didn't answer immediately. He stared at the horizon, where the snow met the gray morning sky. "Because I stopped being useful," he said finally. "Because I made enemies when I tried to walk away." Elena turned to him. "Walk away from what?" He looked at her, eyes dark and tired. "From a life that eats people alive." For a while, neither of them spoke. The sound of the wind filled the space between them. Then Adrian said quietly, "You should have left me in that snow, Elena. You didn't save a good man." She looked down at her hands. "Maybe not, but I saved one who still had a heartbeat. That's all I saw." Adrian's gaze softened. Something rare, something human. The silence stretched again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was calm. For the first time since the gunfire began, they weren't running. But far away, through the still air, came the faint sound of an engine. They both looked up. The hunt wasn't over. It was only getting closer. The sound of the engine grew louder, echoing faintly through the trees. It wasn't close yet, but it was moving toward them, steady and relentless, like something that had already chosen its prey. Elena turned to Adrian. They found the trail. He nodded slowly, pushing himself upright with effort. His face was pale, lips tight with pain. Every movement looked like it cost him something. "We can't outrun them much longer," she said. "I know." His voice was calm. Too calm. "There's a hunting cabin a few miles east. I used it once, a long time ago. If it's still standing, we can make it before nightfall." Elena looked at him, realizing he was guessing more than remembering, but she didn't argue. She just helped him to his feet. For the next hour, they moved through the snow in silence. The wind had died, but the cold felt sharper now, biting through their clothes. Adrian's steps were uneven. Every few minutes he'd stumble slightly, then steady himself again. Elena stayed close, sometimes slipping an arm under his when he faltered. She didn't say anything. She just kept walking. The forest began to thin, opening into a narrow valley. The snow here was untouched, smooth and white, but their footprints left a trail behind them, a map for anyone who might be following. Adrian stopped, breathing hard. His voice came low. "We need to cover our tracks." Elena glanced back at the line of prints stretching behind them. "How?" He pulled off his coat and started brushing snow over the trail with his sleeve. "Like this. Slow them down." Elena did the same, though her fingers had gone numb. She didn't complain. She just worked beside him until the prints faded into the white. When they started moving again, she noticed his pace slowing more. His strength was failing. She could see it in the way his shoulders slumped and his head dipped lower. "Adrian," she said quietly, "we need to stop." He shook his head. If we stop, we freeze. You'll collapse before we reach anywhere safe. He didn't answer. He just kept walking until his legs finally gave out beneath him. Elena caught him before he hit the ground. Adrian! He leaned against her, breath ragged, sweat freezing against his skin. I just need a minute, he whispered. But she could see it, the exhaustion in his face, the tremor in his hands. He was running on nothing but willpower now. Elena looked around desperately. Then, not far ahead, she spotted a dark shape half buried in the snow, an old cabin, slanted to one side, smoke blackened from years ago. Come on, she said. Just a little more. He barely managed to stand, but with her shoulder under his arm, they made it. She pushed the door open. The wood creaked, but it held. Inside, the air was stale but dry. She guided him to a corner and lowered him gently to the floor. His coat was soaked, his skin cold to the touch. Stay still, she said, her voice shaking. You're burning up. Adrian gave a faint smile. I thought I was freezing. Don't talk. She searched the cabin quickly, finding an old blanket, some tools, and a cracked metal stove. Miraculously, a few pieces of firewood were still stacked beside it. She knelt, her hands trembling as she struck the first match. The fire came slowly, the tiny flame catching the edge of the wood. When it finally lit, a faint orange glow filled the room. Elena turned back to him. He looked worse now, his eyes half closed, breathing shallow. She knelt beside him, pulling off his gloves, pressing her hands to his cheeks to warm him. Hey, she said softly. Stay with me. He opened his eyes slowly, meeting hers. You should go. I'm not leaving you. His gaze searched her face for a long moment, then drifted toward the flickering fire. You don't understand what happens to people who help me. Then they'll have to go through me, too, she whispered. Adrian almost laughed, a quiet, broken sound. You don't even know who I really am. I don't need to. The firelight flickered across his face, softening the hard lines that life had carved there. He looked tired, not just from the night, but from years of surviving a world that never gave second chances. Outside, the wind picked up again, faint but rising. Somewhere far off, an engine revved. Elena heard it. She stood and looked toward the window. The sound was distant, but closer than before. They're coming, she said. Adrian didn't move. They won't stop until they find me. Then they'll have to find an empty cabin. He frowned weakly. What are you saying? She crossed the room, throwing a few snow-covered blankets near the door. There's a path behind the hill. If I can draw them off— No, he interrupted, his voice rough but firm. You can't. You don't get to decide this, she said, turning to face him. You've been fighting alone for too long, Adrian. Let someone else take a turn. He stared at her, breathing unevenly. You'll get yourself killed. Maybe. But not doing something would feel worse. The silence between them stretched. Finally, he looked down, his voice quiet. You're not built for this world, Elena. She stepped closer. Then maybe your world needs to change. Outside, the engine roared again. Closer now, Elena glanced toward the fire, then back at him. If they find this place, they'll think you're inside. You have to move now. Through the back. Adrian hesitated. You really think you can fool them? I think I can buy you time. He watched her for a long moment. Then finally he nodded once. You're braver than you should be, she smiled faintly. So are you. He took one last look at her, a look filled with everything he couldn't say, then pushed himself to his feet. As he slipped out the back, Elena turned toward the fire and threw a blanket over it, letting the smoke rise just enough to look real. Then she stood by the door, listening. The sound of approaching vehicles grew louder, and for the first time since that night began, Elena wasn't afraid. She was ready. The night was a living thing, full of wind, cold, and danger. Outside, the rumble of engines broke through the silence like thunder rolling over the snow. Headlights cut across the trees, searching, hungry. Inside the cabin, Elena stood completely still. Her heartbeat was the only sound she could hear, steady, loud, refusing to calm. Adrian was gone, somewhere beyond the hill, lost in the dark. She'd told him to go, but now that he was gone, the emptiness felt unbearable. The first vehicle stopped just outside. Doors slammed. Voices carried through the cold. "She's here," one of the men called. "The fire's still burning." Elena took a breath, forcing her fear down into something quieter, something she could control. She picked up the small iron poker from near the stove and pressed herself against the wall, hidden by the shadows. The door creaked open. Snowlight spilled in. 3 men stepped inside, dressed in black, rifles ready, faces hard. One of them, tall, with a scar down his cheek, looked around the room. His voice was low, confident. "He's close. The girls just cover. Check the back." Elena didn't move. Her pulse pounded in her ears. The second man started toward the back door, and that's when she acted. She swung the iron bar hard, hitting his arm. The gun flew from his hand, clattering to the floor. He shouted, spinning toward her, but she'd already grabbed the weapon. The scarred man turned, raising his own rifle. But she fired first. The shot cracked through the cabin, deafening. He stumbled back, hit the doorframe, and fell into the snow. For a split second, everything went silent again. Elena stood frozen, smoke curling from the gun barrel, her whole body shaking. The third man cursed and ducked behind the table, returning fire. Wood splintered near her head. She dropped low, crawling toward the far wall, her breath coming in sharp bursts. Outside, another engine revved. More headlights. More voices. They were surrounded. Elena's mind raced. If they came inside all at once, she wouldn't stand a chance. But if she could make them believe Adrian was still here. She moved quickly, kicking over a chair, dragging a coat toward the doorway. The noise echoed just enough to make it sound like movement from another room. A shout came from outside. "He's still in there! Go!" 3 more men stormed in. The confusion worked for a moment, long enough for Elena to dive behind the fallen table. Gunfire erupted. The sound tore through the night. Through the chaos, she thought she heard something else. A single, distant gunshot from the trees. Then another, and then, through the storm, a shadow moved, Adrian. He came from behind the cabin, silent as a ghost, gun steady in his hand. His face was pale. Blood streaked across his sleeve, but his eyes were cold and focused. 2 of the men turned toward him too late. He fired once, then twice more. Both dropped into the snow before they could react. Elena pushed the door open and stumbled outside, the cold biting into her skin. "Adrian!" He caught her arm, pulling her close, his breath visible in the freezing air. "Are you hurt?" "No, you shouldn't have come back." He gave a faint, humorless smile. "You didn't really think I'd leave you, did you?" Another shot rang out when close. Adrian turned, pulling her down behind the side of the cabin as bullets hit the wood above them. "Stay down," he said. "I'm not letting you fight them alone," she shot back. His eyes met hers, steady, dark, full of something fierce and unspoken. Then he handed her the second gun. "Then don't miss." They moved together, quiet, precise, as if they'd done this before. Adrian took the left side, Elena the right. The men spread through the trees, their flashlights cutting through the falling snow. The night became a blur of light and shadow, gunfire and silence. Each sound echoed through the forest, the hiss of snow, the rush of breath, the cold pulse of survival. Adrian moved like a man possessed. Every shot he took was calculated, deliberate. But his body was failing him, every movement slower than the last, his blood marking the snow behind him. Elena saw it. And it terrified her more than the bullets. When one of the attackers circled behind him, she didn't think. She ran forward, shouting his name. The man turned toward her, gun raised. But before he could fire, Adrian was there, blocking the shot. The sound was deafening. He staggered, pain flashing across his face. "No!" Elena cried, catching him as he fell to his knees. Adrian's hand pressed against his chest, blood seeping fast through his coat. He looked at her, voice strained. "It's nothing." But they both knew it wasn't. Another man appeared through the snow, gun aimed straight at them. Elena turned, raising her weapon with trembling hands. Her shot hit the man's shoulder, sending him crashing backward. Then silence again. Only the wind. Only the sound of her breath and his, shallow and fading. Elena pressed her hand against his wound. "You're not dying here," she whispered fiercely. Adrian gave a weak smile. "You keep saying that like it's your choice." Then let it be, she said. For once let someone choose for you. His eyes softened. Despite the pain, despite the chaos, there was a strange peace in his face. The kind that comes when a man realizes he's finally not alone. He lifted his hand, brushing her cheek. His voice was barely a whisper. You're going to get yourself killed, Elena. Then I'll be in good company, she said. The wind howled through the trees again, louder this time. But it wasn't just wind. It was engines. Dozens of them. The forest lit up with headlights. They weren't done. Not yet. The woods exploded with light. Dozens of beams cut through the falling snow. White, blinding, merciless. The low hum of engines swelled into a roar, echoing through the frozen hills. Elena tightened her grip on Adrian's arm, trying to pull him toward cover. His steps faltered, heavy, uneven. He was bleeding too much. Adrian, stay with me, she whispered, her voice trembling with cold and fear. He stumbled but didn't stop. Keep moving. Don't look back. They slipped between the trees, their breath visible in the icy air. Behind them, voices shouted orders, sharp, cruel, confident. Fan out. They're both here. Branches whipped against Elena's face as she pushed through the snow. Her boots sank deep, slowing her down. Adrian's body leaned against hers for support, heavier with every step. The slope ahead was steep, the ground uneven, but she didn't care. She just had to keep him upright, keep him breathing. Then, a voice. Cold, familiar. Too close. Well, it said, echoing through the trees. If it isn't the ghost himself. Elena froze. Her blood turned to ice. A figure stepped from behind a tree, tall, broad, his coat dusted with snow. His voice carried the calm arrogance of a man who never missed his mark, Marco Vitali. Adrian's most trusted lieutenant once, until the betrayal that left him shot and abandoned in the snow. Adrian's eyes lifted, slow and full of quiet fury. You. Marco smiled, stepping closer, gun loose in his gloved hand. You should have stayed dead, boss. It would have saved everyone a lot of trouble. Elena instinctively stepped in front of Adrian, shielding him. You don't have to do this, she said, voice shaking but steady. Marco tilted his head. Don't I? His gaze flicked over her. You must be the little nurse who pulled him out of the dirt. Brave, stupid, but brave. She didn't answer. Adrian's hand pressed lightly against her arm. Elena, step back. I'm not leaving you, she whispered. Marco chuckled, dark and amused. Touching. He bleeds all over your cabin, drags death to your doorstep, and you think it's love. He took another step forward. Adrian's voice was low, rough, but still carried the weight of command. You should have known better than to betray me, Marco. You think they'll ever follow you? You're just another man hiding behind my name. Marco's expression hardened. Your name? You lost that the night I found you in the snow. He raised his gun, slow, deliberate, aiming for Adrian's head. Elena didn't think. She lunged forward, shoving Marco's arm upward. The gun went off, the shot echoing through the woods. Snow burst into the air. Adrian dropped to one knee, the sound of the gunfire ringing in his ears. Elena fought for the weapon, grabbing Marco's arm with everything she had. He twisted, throwing her into the snow, but she held on. They rolled, struggling for control. Adrian tried to raise his gun, but his vision blurred. His strength was fading too fast. Marco pinned Elena down, fury blazing in his eyes. You should have stayed out of this. Adrian's voice cut through the wind, hoarse, raw. She's the reason I'm still alive. And then, a single shot. Marco froze. His eyes widened. For a second he looked confused, as if he couldn't believe what had just happened. Then he fell, face first into the snow. Behind him, Adrian's hand still gripped the gun, smoke rising from the barrel. His arm trembled violently, but his aim had been true. Elena pushed herself up, gasping. Her hands were shaking, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. She crawled toward him. Adrian. Hey, look at me. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Blood stained his lips. His gun fell from his hand, sinking into the snow beside him. She pressed her hands against his chest, trying to stop the bleeding again. You're not dying. Not after everything. He exhaled, slow and ragged. You always say that. Tears burned in her eyes. Because I mean it. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Only the sound of the storm, the whisper of wind, the slow fall of snow, the quiet hum of something ending and beginning at once. Then, distant sirens. Faint but real. Elena looked up, confused. Who? Adrian gave a weak, broken smile. I called them. Before I came back, her eyes widened. You what? He coughed, a small laugh breaking through the pain. Didn't think I'd die without a plan, did you? The sound of engines grew louder. Red and blue lights flickered through the trees. But not all the headlights were sirens. Half of them belonged to black cars. Familiar, sleek, and deadly. Adrian's allies. His old crew. Elena looked around, realization hitting her like a shock. You brought them here. Adrian's gaze softened. Not all debts are settled in blood. The woods filled with men, some in uniform, some not. Weapons raised, voices shouting orders. The world spun into motion again. Elena stayed beside him through it all, her hand still pressed to his wound, refusing to let go. Through the flashing lights, through the chaos, Adrian's eyes found hers again. You saved me twice, you know. She shook her head, tears falling freely. You would have done the same. He smiled faintly. That's what scares me. Then the medics reached them, pulling him onto a stretcher, voices blurring together. She held his hand until they took him away, until the night swallowed him whole. And for a moment, there was nothing but snow, soft, cold, endless. But in that silence, she knew one thing for certain. The man who had been shot, betrayed, and left for dead in the snow wasn't gone. He was still fighting, and so was she. The world after gunfire feels strange. Quiet, too quiet, as if sound itself is afraid to return. Elena stood in the snow, her breath shallow, eyes fixed on the trail of red lights disappearing down the frozen road. The medics had taken Adrian, the man who'd once ruled half the city with a single word, now fighting for his life under white hospital lights. The forest was empty again, but the silence wasn't peace. It was the kind that hums under your skin, full of everything unsaid. She sank to her knees. Her gloves were soaked with his blood, sticky and dark. She stared at them, at the shaking of her own hands, at the faint smell of gunpowder that wouldn't leave the air. For a long moment, she couldn't move. Then, headlights again. A single black SUV rolled to a stop beside her. The window lowered. A man stepped out, tall, sharp suit, expression unreadable. Elena Vargas. His tone wasn't a question. She nodded slowly. Mr. Moretti asked us to take you somewhere safe. Her stomach twisted. Safe. Nothing about that night had felt safe. Not the snow. Not the blood. Not even the way Adrian had looked at her before they took him away, as if there was something he wasn't saying. She hesitated, then climbed into the car. The ride was long and silent. The world outside was a blur of white and gray, the kind of morning that doesn't feel like it belongs to anyone. When they finally stopped, it wasn't a hospital. It was a private estate, stone walls, guarded gates, windows lit from inside. Adrian's world. The driver opened her door but didn't follow her in. Inside, warmth hit her face, firelight, soft and golden. She almost forgot what warmth felt like. A man stood near the window, older, composed, eyes dark as winter. She recognized him from the news once. Dante Moretti, Adrian's uncle. The kind of man who made empires move with quiet words. Elena, he said gently, motioning for her to sit. You saved my nephew's life. She shook her head. I found him. That's all? No, he said. You did more than that. His voice carried something between gratitude and warning. Elena met his gaze, unsure what to say. Adrian's in surgery, Dante continued. He's strong, but the bullet, it missed his heart by less than an inch. He's alive because you refused to give up. Her eyes burned. Relief, exhaustion, disbelief, all tangled together. When can I see him? She asked softly. Dante paused. Soon. But you should understand something first. He stepped closer. His presence was calm, but his words were sharp. You stepped into a war you don't understand. Men like Adrian, they don't live simple lives. Saving him means you're part of this now, whether you wanted to be or not. Elena swallowed hard. I didn't do it for that. I did it because he was dying. Dante smiled faintly. Not cruelly, but like a man who'd heard that kind of innocence before, and knew how quickly it vanished. Still, he said, he won't forget it, and neither will his enemies. He turned toward the window again. Outside, dawn was breaking over the snow, a pale, ghostly light stretching across the hills. When he wakes, Dante said quietly, everything will change. Adrian woke to the sound of machines, the steady beep of monitors, the hiss of oxygen, the sterile smell of antiseptic. For a moment, he thought he was still in the snow, cold, fading, alone. But the light was too bright, too still. He turned his head slightly. Pain burned through his chest, sharp and deep. He winced. "Welcome back," a voice said. He blinked until the shape beside his bed came into focus. Dante. Adrian's throat was dry. "How long?" 36 hours, Dante replied. "You almost didn't make it." Adrian's gaze drifted to the IV line in his arm, the bandages on his chest. "Where is she?" Dante didn't answer right away. "Safe, for now. Adrian's voice was weak but edged. "She drew blood, Adrian," Dante said quietly. They saw her face. "The Vitali family will want revenge." Adrian's jaw tightened. "They can come for me, not her," Dante sighed. "You can't protect everyone. Not anymore." Adrian turned his head toward the window. The world outside was white and calm, but it didn't feel clean. It felt temporary, like the pause between storms. "She doesn't belong in this," Dante continued. "You know what happens to people who stay close to men like us." Adrian's voice was quiet, but steady. "Then I'll change what happens." Dante studied him for a long moment. "You sound like your father." Adrian's lips curved faintly. "He lived long enough to terrify half of Europe." "And died before he could save himself," Dante said. "Don't make the same mistake." He left then, his footsteps soft against the marble floor. The door closed. Silence returned. Adrian lay still, the rhythm of the machines keeping time with the ache in his chest. But somewhere beneath the pain, beneath the haze of medicine and memory, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not vengeance. Not fear, hope, and that was dangerous. The snow outside the hospital hadn't stopped falling. It was soft now. Quiet. The kind of snow that covered scars but didn't erase them. Elena stood in the hallway outside Adrian's room, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee gone cold. Nurses passed by in steady rhythms. Machines beeped from behind closed doors. The world felt distant, suspended. For 2 days, she hadn't left the building. She couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the blood, the snow, the way he'd looked at her before they pulled him away. When the door finally opened and a doctor stepped out, her heart jumped. "He's stable," the doctor said softly. "Weak but awake." Elena exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Can I see him?" The doctor hesitated, then nodded. "Just a few minutes." She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was quiet, dimly lit. Adrian sat propped up against the pillows, the pale morning light falling across his face. He looked nothing like the man she'd first met, the cold, dangerous stranger in the snow. There was strength still, yes, but also something fragile, human. When he turned his head, his eyes met hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then faintly, "You look like hell." Her laugh came out shaky. "You're one to talk." He smiled, just a small, tired curve of his lips. But it was real. Elena walked closer, her footsteps slow, cautious, like approaching something she still wasn't sure was real. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "It's not safe." She stopped at the edge of his bed. "And yet, here I am." His eyes softened. "Why?" The question hung in the air between them. Heavy. Honest. She looked down at her hands. "Because I couldn't walk away. Because when I found you in that snow, you weren't some mafia boss to me. You were just a man who'd been left to die. And I couldn't let that be the end of you." For a long time, he didn't speak. He just watched her, the woman who had turned his death into a second chance. Finally, he said, "You shouldn't have saved me." Her eyes snapped up. "Don't say that. I'm not the man you think I am," he said, voice rough. There's blood on my hands, Elena, too much of it. And now that you've stood beside me, they'll come for you too. She stepped closer, defiant. Then let them come. His gaze flickered, surprise, pain, admiration all tangled together. You don't understand what that means, he said. I do, she replied softly. It means I don't get to pretend anymore. You think I'm some innocent stranger who stumbled into your world, but you're wrong. I've seen enough of life to know what it costs. And if I had to choose again, she swallowed, I'd still pull you out of that snow. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Full of everything they'd survived. Everything they hadn't said. Adrian's hand moved slightly, as if reaching for hers, but stopped halfway. She noticed, and took the step he couldn't. Her fingers brushed his, warm against the cold of his skin. For the first time, he didn't pull away. You don't owe me anything, he murmured. She shook her head. I know. He looked at her. Really looked. And something in him cracked, just a little. The armor, the control, the years of silence that came with power and guilt. When I was out there, he said quietly. When I thought it was over, I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid no one would remember who I really was before all this. Before the blood. Before the name. Her voice was barely above a whisper. And who are you? He hesitated, then smiled faintly. Someone who still believed in mercy. She squeezed his hand gently. Then maybe he's still in there. For a long moment, the world shrank down to that small hospital room. 2 people, the steady rhythm of machines, and the quiet hum of something like peace. Then the door opened. Dante Moretti stepped in, his presence filling the room like cold air. He looked between them, at the touch of their hands, at the softness in Adrian's eyes, and understood everything without a word. Elena, he said evenly. It's time, she turned. Time for what? Dante's expression didn't change. For you to leave the city, at least for now. My men will take you to a safe house. Elena's heart dropped. You can't be serious, Adrian's voice cut through, quiet but firm. He's right. She turned back to him. Adrian, please, he said. Just this once, do what I ask. Her throat tightened. What if I don't want to? Then they'll find you, he said softly, and I won't be able to protect you. Tears blurred her vision. I don't need your protection. I know, he said, a faint smile ghosting across his face. But I need to give it anyway. There was no argument left in her. Only heartbreak. She leaned down, her forehead resting lightly against his. His breath was shallow, warm against her skin. You don't get to disappear again, she whispered. I'll find you, he promised, when this is over. The words were soft, but they carried weight. The kind of promise made between 2 people who knew the world would try to break it. When she finally pulled away, her hands lingered just a second longer. Then she turned, walking past Dante, out into the cold corridor where the snowlight spilled across the floor. Behind her, Adrian closed his eyes. The sound of her footsteps faded, but her warmth didn't. It stayed, even as the snow kept falling outside. Even as the war he'd tried to escape began to close in again. He wasn't the man he'd been before the snow. Not anymore. And somewhere out there, a girl who had once saved him was waiting for the man he might still become. Winter passed, but the cold never really left. It lingered in small ways, in the sound of footsteps echoing through empty streets, in the quiet of mornings that felt too still, in the way Elena sometimes woke up with her heart pounding, as if she could still hear gunfire buried somewhere beneath the snow. 3 months had gone by since that night. 3 months since she last saw Adrian Moretti. The city had changed. It always did. Rumors spread like frost. Stories whispered in bars and alleyways about a man who had come back from the dead. Some said he was rebuilding. Some said he'd vanished again. No one really knew the truth, but Elena did. She could feel him in the silence between headlines. In the way the city held its breath. She was living now in a small apartment above a bookstore in another town. Quiet, ordinary, almost safe. The kind of place where people smiled at you for no reason. She told herself that was enough. She'd go to work, shelve books, make coffee, pretend she wasn't waiting for a shadow to cross her door. Pretend she hadn't memorized the exact sound of his voice. At night, when the world was asleep, she'd sometimes take out the small silver lighter he'd left behind, engraved with his initials, and hold it between her hands. She'd never lit it. She just liked the weight of it. The reminder that once, in a world built on blood and loyalty, he'd been human enough to save her too. And yet, every time the door to the shop opened and a stranger stepped in, her heart would leap. Half hope, half fear. He never came. Not until the night the storm returned. It started the same way it always did. Quiet, steady flakes falling over the rooftops. But something in the air was different. The same electricity she'd felt the night she found him. The same cold that meant something was about to change. She was locking up the store when she heard it. Footsteps behind her. Slow, purposeful. She turned, pulse quickening. A man stood at the edge of the streetlight, black coat, collar turned up against the wind. For a second, she thought it was just another stranger, until he stepped forward. Her breath caught. It was him, Adrian, alive, changed, but still him. The same eyes, sharper now, older somehow. The faint scar on his jaw. The same quiet intensity that made the world seem to slow around him. He didn't speak right away. Neither did she. The snow fell between them, soft and endless. Finally he said, "You moved." Her voice trembled. "You found me. I said I would." He took another step closer. She could see the exhaustion in him. Not from injury this time, but from living too long in the world he'd chosen. His hands were bare against the cold, and there was something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Peace. Or maybe surrender. "Dante said you were safe here," he said. "I was," she whispered. Until now, that made him smile, the smallest, most fragile smile. "You always did know how to ruin a good plan." Her chest tightened. "You shouldn't be here. They'll find you." "They already have," he said quietly. The words hit her like a slow, sharp wave. "What?" "There was no way to erase what happened," he continued. "Marco's people wanted revenge. They came for Dante's house last week." Her breath stopped. "Is he alive?" Adrian said. "Barely. But this isn't about him anymore." He stepped closer until the snow between them was only a whisper. "I came here because I couldn't disappear again." "Not from you." Her voice shook. "You promised you'd stay alive." "I did," he said softly, "and I kept it." For a moment, they stood in the middle of that empty street, the wind circling them, the world beyond their small circle of light falling away. "You saved me once," he said. "Now I need to save you." She frowned. "From what?" "From the life that follows me," he said simply. "It doesn't stop. It never will. And if they find out where you are—" "I don't care," she interrupted. "Don't you understand? I stopped being afraid the night I pulled you out of that snow." The look in his eyes changed, from steel to something deeper. "Elena." He said her name like it hurt. "If I stay, they'll come for you. And if you go?" He hesitated. "Then maybe you live." She took a step forward. "That's not living." The silence between them cracked. Fragile, full of everything they hadn't said. Then she reached for his hand. Cold met warm, her fingers curled around his. "You can keep running from them," she said, "but don't run from me." For a long time he didn't move. Then slowly, he closed his hand around hers. The snow fell heavier. The wind grew colder. And yet, for the first time since that night in the forest, the world felt alive again. He didn't promise her forever. He didn't have to. In the quiet, with the snow falling between them, it was enough to know they'd both stopped running. The next morning, the world looked clean again. Snow covered everything. The streets, the rooftops, even the shadows. It was the kind of silence that felt almost holy, but neither of them believed in peace anymore. Elena made coffee in the small kitchen, hands trembling slightly as she set a mug in front of him. Adrian sat at the table, his coat draped over the back of the chair, steam curling around the edges of his scarred hands. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The sound of the wind outside filled the silence like a heartbeat. He finally broke it. "You shouldn't have stayed." She looked up. "You came back. You don't get to tell me to run." He almost smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You think love makes you untouchable?" "No," she said softly. "I think love makes you human." That stopped him. For just a second, she saw it. The man beneath the name, beneath the gunfire and blood. The one who used to dream before the world taught him not to. He looked down at the coffee, then back at her. You have no idea what's coming. Then tell me, she said. Stop protecting me like I'm something fragile. He leaned back in the chair, jaw tight. Marco's younger brother, Lucian, took control. He's not like Marco. He doesn't talk, he doesn't warn. He just destroys. And the first name on his list is mine. Elena's pulse quickened. And the second, Adrian's voice was barely a whisper. Yours. The room went quiet again. But not the kind of quiet that felt peaceful. It was heavy, thick with everything unspoken. So what now? She asked. He met her eyes. We leave, tonight. Where? Somewhere they won't look. Somewhere cold. Somewhere like that night. Her lips parted in disbelief. Back to the mountains? He nodded once. If they want a ghost, I'll give them one. She stared at him, realizing what he meant. You're going to make them think you're dead again. It's the only way you stay alive. Her voice broke. Adrian, last time I thought I lost you. He stood up and crossed the room in 2 strides, pressing his hands gently against her arms. You didn't lose me, he said, his tone steady, firm. You saved me. You gave me something to come back to. But if I stay now, I'll only bring the war here. Tears stung her eyes. Then take me with you. He shook his head. You wouldn't survive that life. Neither did you, she whispered. The words hit harder than any bullet. For a long moment, they just stood there, breathing the same air, suspended between what they wanted and what the world would allow. Then she turned away, wiping her face. You're going to leave again, aren't you? His silence was answer enough. She nodded slowly, forcing herself to stay calm. At least this time I want to be the one who lets go. When she looked back at him, he saw something new in her eyes. Strength. Not the kind that fights with guns or words, but the kind that survives without needing to win. I loved you when you were broken, she said, and I'll love you when you're gone, but I won't let that be all I am. Adrian reached for her hand, but she didn't move. Elena, don't, she said softly. Just promise me one thing. Anything. When this is over, when the world finally forgets your name, remember mine. He didn't answer. He just looked at her like a man memorizing his last light before walking into the dark. That night, he left without a sound. The snow was falling again, thick and endless, swallowing his footsteps before they could be followed. She stood at the window and watched him disappear, his silhouette fading into the white, the same way it had once appeared. For the first time, she didn't chase after him. She let the silence take him, because sometimes love isn't about holding on. Sometimes it's about being strong enough to let the other person survive, even if it means doing it without you. And when dawn came, the first light hit the frost on the window just right, and she swore she could still see him there in the reflection, not gone. Just out of reach, somewhere between life and legend. The world turned silent again. Days slipped into weeks, and weeks into months. The snow melted, the streets thawed, and yet Elena never stopped feeling that chill, the kind that seeps beneath the skin and stays. Sometimes she would dream of him. Not the man covered in blood and snow, but the one who used to sit quietly across from her, his gaze soft, as if trying to memorize her face for a day he knew would come too soon. And then, one night, the news broke. Gunfire on the northern border. Warehouse explosion. Multiple casualties. No names at first. Just smoke and silence. But Elena knew. She could feel it in the air, like a pulse under the world's surface. Adrian had gone back to finish it, to end the war he didn't start but could never escape. Far away, in the heart of an abandoned steel mill near the frozen docks, the final storm was unfolding. Lucien Moretti waited, standing in the middle of the wreckage his brother left behind. Younger, colder, his smile thin and venomous. His men circled the shadows like wolves that had forgotten what mercy meant. And then, from the snow outside, footsteps. Slow, steady. Adrian walked in. No army, no backup. Just a man who'd already buried his fear long ago. Lucian laughed softly. So the ghost returns. Adrian said nothing. He simply took off his gloves, letting them fall to the floor. The air was heavy, the kind that burned when you breathed. You killed my brother, Lucian said, circling. You destroyed my family. Adrian's voice was low even. Your brother destroyed himself. I just buried what was left. Lucian smirked. And now you want me to believe this is justice? No, Adrian said. This is peace. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, a signal, and the warehouse erupted in gunfire. Adrian moved like a shadow, calm and precise, each motion fueled by something colder than rage, purpose. The kind that comes when you have nothing left to lose but everything left to protect. By the time the echo faded, smoke and silence were all that remained. Lucian was still standing, wounded, furious, desperate. He staggered toward Adrian, pulling a blade from his belt. "You can't kill all of us," he spat. Adrian looked at him, calm, unreadable. "I don't need to." They clashed, steel against skin, strength against exhaustion. The sound of metal rang out through the empty halls like a final confession. Lucian fought with fury. Adrian fought with memory. When it was over, Lucian lay still on the cold floor. Adrian stood above him, bleeding, breath shallow. He dropped the weapon, let it clatter against the concrete. There was no triumph in his eyes, no satisfaction, only silence. He turned and walked out into the snow, the same way he'd walked into it months ago. Alone. Elena found out days later. Not from the news. There were no reports, no headlines. Just a letter left in her mailbox, folded and sealed with wax. No return address, no signature, just her name written in his handwriting. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside, a few words. "If you're reading this, it means it's done. The war's over. Don't look for me. You once said love makes us human. You were right. You gave me back my soul." Her breath caught. The ink was smudged, as if touched by snow or blood. She pressed the paper to her chest and closed her eyes. Somewhere, she knew he was out there, not dead, not gone, just finally free from everything that had chained him. And for the first time, she smiled through her tears, because she realized something he never had the chance to say. He didn't walk away from her to disappear. He walked away so she could live in a world where love wasn't always tied to pain. The kind of world he'd never known. That night, Elena went back to the small mountain road, the same, one where she'd once found him bleeding in the snow. It was quiet, still. The wind whispered through the trees like a voice too old to belong to anyone. She knelt down, brushed away a patch of snow, and placed the silver lighter there. His lighter. Exactly where she'd first seen him. The engraving caught the faint moonlight. Then she whispered, "You found your peace. I'll find mine." When she stood, she didn't look back, because some stories don't end with a kiss. Some end with the kind of silence that means survival. And in that silence, love still lives. Not as a memory, but as something eternal. 1 year later, the mountain was silent again. Winter had returned, soft and relentless, covering the old scars of the earth as if trying to erase everything that once bled here. Elena parked her small car at the edge of the forest road and stepped out. The air was colder than she remembered, sharp, clean, almost holy. She stood there for a moment, letting the wind bite at her cheeks, breathing in the scent of pine and frost. It had been 12 months since the letter. 12 months since she buried the lighter beneath the snow, and 12 months since she last said his name aloud. Adrian Moretti. The world had moved on. The newspapers forgot him. The whispers in the city vanished. The Mafia families fractured, rebuilt, renamed, and the ghosts went quiet. But for Elena, time had not erased him. It had simply softened the ache into something deeper. Like the echo of a song that never really fades. She walked through the snow-covered path, boots crunching softly beneath her. Each step took her closer to the place where it all began, where a dying man had become her reason to live. When she reached the clearing, she stopped. It looked different now. Smaller. Emptier. The old cabin was half buried under snow, its roof caved in, its windows blank and dark. But the silence still hummed with memory. She knelt down, brushing away a thin layer of frost. The silver lighter was still there, exactly where she'd left it. The metal was tarnished now, weathered by storms, but the initials remained. A.M. She smiled faintly, tracing the letters with her glove. "I kept my promise," she whispered. "I lived. The wind picked up, swirling snow around her like a curtain. Somewhere deep in the trees, a branch snapped, sharp, sudden, echoing through the woods. Her breath caught. She turned. For a moment, she thought she saw movement. A shadow between the trees. Tall, broad-shouldered, still. Her pulse quickened. "Adrian?" No answer, only the whisper of the wind. She closed her eyes, shaking her head. "You're gone," she murmured. "You have to be." And yet, something in her wouldn't believe it, because she could still feel him, that strange warmth in the cold, that quiet pull in her chest that told her she wasn't truly alone. She stood there for a long time, letting the snow fall against her skin, until finally, she turned to leave. As she walked away, the forest grew quiet again. Then, a faint crunch of footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate. She stopped. Halfway down the path, heart pounding, behind her, at the edge of the clearing, the lighter's flame flickered once, impossibly alive, before the wind swallowed it whole. Elena turned back, eyes wide. But the clearing was empty, only snow and silence. Still, she smiled, because maybe ghosts aren't what haunt us. Maybe it's love that refuses to die quietly. She whispered into the wind, "Goodbye, Adrian." But somewhere, deep in the forest, a man's voice, faint, distant, carried by the storm, answered, "Never goodbye. Just until next time." The sound faded with the wind, but her tears came with a smile, because she knew now, some people don't need graves or endings. They live on in the places that change them, in the snow that remembers their touch, in the hearts that keep waiting even when they say they won't. Elena turned toward the horizon, where the first light of dawn spilled through the clouds, gold and silver, the same way it had the morning after she saved him. She walked toward it slowly, each step lighter than the last, leaving behind the past, the pain, and the ghost of the man who had once been more myth than mortal. And as the forest faded behind her, one truth remained: love doesn't end in fire or blood. It ends in quiet, in the kind of peace that only comes after surviving the impossible. The snow began to fall again, softer this time, and if you stood there long enough, you could swear you saw it. A faint outline in the distance, standing at the edge of the trees, watching her go, alive, silent, and finally free. The storm ended, but their story didn't. Somewhere beyond the mountains, beyond the snow, beyond what the world will ever know, two souls kept their promise in silence. Elena found peace in the ordinary. Adrian found freedom in the shadows, and between them, a love that was never meant to survive, somehow did. Because love isn't always about staying. Sometimes it's about saving, even if that means walking away. He was a man built from violence and loyalty. She was the quiet mercy the world forgot to give him. Together, they wrote something no bullet could erase. A love story born in the snow and buried in silence. But the world of power never truly sleeps. And peace never lasts. Far away, in the heart of the city, a name resurfaces, whispered through corridors of crime and power. Someone new is rising, someone who remembers the night Adrian Moretti disappeared, and as one story fades, another begins, darker, deeper, more dangerous than before. Because in this world, love isn't the ending, it's the weapon. This was Mafia boss shot and left for dead in the snow, until a girl finds and saves him. A story of redemption, survival, and love written in blood and winter. If this story touched your heart, hit subscribe. Stay with us and get ready, because the next chapter begins soon.